I am the slowest application writer ever. Like it is painful to watch me write these things because I get like mentally caught up in like convincing myself that I like, my work will never cut it, so why bother trying?
Well, thanks, Vicki, for joining me today. Why don't we start with just a quick introduction about who you are and where you're chatting from today.
Why, thank you, Tilak. I'm really excited to be part of this podcast. So, hi, everyone. I'm Vicki, and I am an assistant professor in mechanical engineering at the University of British Columbia's Okanagan campus. I'm part of this, or joining this podcast from the traditional unceded territory of Silk Okanagan Nation, and I'm really excited to have the chance to work in this role today and moving forward. I first met Tilak several years ago at the University of Toronto when I was making decisions on where to go for my PhD, and ultimately ended up working in his area at Toronto Rehab.
Yeah, fantastic. So what as you were thinking about your leaving your undergrad and then going into grad school, what was the process you went through? You were, I believe, you're from Alberta originally. Is that right? Yeah. So what made you think about coming to Ontario and coming to University of Toronto?
Right. So I went to University of Toronto for my undergrad. I did my undergrad studies in engineering science at U of T and studied the biomedical engineering option, where a lot of my work at the time in my courses focused on wet lab type stuff. So a lot of pipetting, a lot of running assays. Um, and I think I got great training as an undergrad student in that area and then worked in a laboratory for a summer. And I was like, oh man, like I cannot pipette for the rest of my life. Like this is not a like viable long-term career plan for me.
Interesting.
Um, and I guess while that was going on, when I was in high school and in undergrad, I always had a very strong interest in working with people. So I was an active volunteer in communities with disabilities. As a high school student, I volunteered at a preschool that integrated kids with disabilities with other kids. So I'd work on things like how do we make snowman building accessible for everyone as a high school project. And then in university, I was also again quite involved in the community. So I swam on the varsity swim team, and we had a partnership with Special Olympics Ontario.
Mm,
Um, so I did a fair bit of coaching of Ontario's top Special Olympics swimming athletes.
very neat. I
Um,
didn't know about that. That's neat.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that kind of got me into working in biomechanics laboratories and motor control laboratories over the summer. So I spent a summer working at University of Calgary on a scoliosis project. I spent another summer working at Holland Bloorview Kids Rehab Hospital with Tom Chow on this project looked at using accelerometers to try to distinguish successful from unsuccessful swallowing in people with dysphagia. So that's like disordered swallowing from conditions like cerebral palsy or strokes or other conditions like that.
Mhm.
So anyway, that was long-winded, but circling back, I had some great summer experiences in the rehab area.
Awesome.
And I still hadn't really been thinking grad school because I decided that swimming was more important than undergrad, and wrapped up fourth year with like a 77 average and figured that was kind of it for my academic pursuits.
Okay.
And then I started getting emails from other faculty members being like, hey, Vicki, given your Special Olympics interests, maybe you'd enjoy working in pursuing grad studies in this area. I hope you're aware that U of T has some exceptional researchers in rehab engineering. Um, so I still wasn't really thinking it. I was like, whatever, I'm never going to get in. And
Interesting.
then was able to speak with some mentors, and they're like, just treat the entrance average as a technicality. It'll be fine as long as you can find someone to commit funding, and given your research background, you'll probably be able to manage that.
Yeah.
Um,
Excellent.
so
That it's similar to what Ahmed, Ahmed chatted with me previous to you, and he said something similar. That that he was a little worried about his marks and whether that would get him into grad school or not. But I think that's an important takeaway: is U of T or at least BME leaves that door open for people, right? That they don't, or SGS, I guess, at University of Toronto grad school, they don't shut the door for people like some other places might say you need a over 80
Mhm.
whatever, over 85 average cutoff. But that's, yeah, good. That's the second time that someone's mentioned that. Cool.
Yeah, no, it was really helpful that U of T is flexible that way.
Yeah.
And that BME has a recommended average, but ultimately it's about whether you can find someone who's willing to support you for 2 to 4 years, depending on what grad work you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Yeah,
Good.
so um,
So where did you hear about? So you ended up doing your PhD. Did you come right in as a PhD, or did you start as a master's and then transition? I can't remember.
I came in as PhD. So after
Right.
finishing undergrad, I was like, I'm done with school.
Right.
I went and worked for a year,
Yeah. Right.
and it was one of the best decisions I had ever made ever. Like, I would highly recommend that year of not being in school to everyone. Because when I went crawling back to graduate studies, I was like, I really want to do grad school. Um,
Where
so at
did
the
you work?
time, I ended up getting into a master's program at Imperial College out in London, UK,
Right.
because they had the opportunity for me to specialize in neurotechnology. So I could take courses in like brain machine interfacing,
Mhm.
um, let's see, neuromuscular control, like entire courses to dedicate to these areas where I wanted to build skills that were different from the pipetting and the assays that I got out of undergrad. um, so while I was out there, my first thought was that, okay, I'll get this master's, I'll go into industry, and then I'll just like be done with school and start making money, and like that'll be it. And then I ended up working with a team that did really exciting work in upper limb movement control. Um, and I'm going through this and thinking, like, okay, so I'm excelling in this area. Maybe I wasn't the best student in undergrad, but it's a whole new ballgame now that I'm in this master's program. We're effectively wiping the slate clean.
Right.
Um, I wasn't keen on the UK's funding structures for PhD students, and that aligned with when U of T got a whole bunch of money for rehab engineering through an Answer Create Award.
Hmm.
um, so it just meant that there were a lot more funds available to support trainees in getting started before my CV was competitive for other larger scholarships.
Hmm.
And then that also coincided with when the facilities at Toronto Rehab were opening.
Hmm.
um, so I'd applied to TRI and to Northwestern because they have the what was then the Rehab Institute of Chicago. I think they're the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab right now. Um, and ended up getting into PhD programs in both cases, not because of my grades, but because I was able to make a credible case for actually caring about the field.
Yeah.
Um, and then decision time hit, and how do you say no to the opportunity to work in SEAL and spend a few years like destabilizing people for science and a living?
Yeah, yeah.
So
For those who don't know, the SEAL is the acronym for the Challenging Environments Assessment Laboratory at Toronto Rehab. So it's I guess it's mainly the basement labs, but the combination of all the simulation facilities that I guess opened, would it have been 2012-ish, 2011, 2012-ish, that were developed by Jeff Fernie and opened around the time that you would have started your
yeah,
PhD. Yeah, yeah, cool. So that was it was the ability to play with kind of all those new labs and
yeah.
technologies was one
The
of the
other thing I'll add to this was it was really important to me to go and do my grad work in an area that would make a difference. So I became really good at the scientific aspects at Imperial. I wanted something that was a bit more directly applied, where I didn't have to go through like pages and pages of writing to explain why my work mattered.
yes.
And it coincided, the timing for me coincided with when I guess a few people at TRI got a large grant to develop home care or products to improve home care.
Hmm.
Um, so I was able to work on a few of those, and it would, I knew it would allow me to graduate knowing that I'd done something important.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
even if it was going to be extra work, I was excited that Toronto Rehab provided the opportunity to potentially leave and make a difference during grad school.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. You did a lot on the home care products, and it was quite a bit removed, if I remember correctly, from your thesis projects,
Yeah.
which I know was probably, so basically it added all this extra work for you. How, but also I I was tangentially involved in some of those projects, so I felt like I was learning along with you as you were, doing all these extra tests on grab bars and things. How, what do you think now in retrospect? How do you feel about having been involved, being pulled into that kind of product development work, um, when in parallel with trying to get a thesis done? Would you recommend it to other students to be involved in things like that?
So I think every student is unique and every student's goals are unique. So when I started my PhD, I kind of assumed that it was a pathway to get a better job doing research and development in industry. So the time that I spent on advancing products made a lot of sense. Um, and they were also at the point where we were pretty confident they'd make it to market.
Hmm.
So I found that actually made it harder to pull back rather than easier because I was like, okay, if I work on this for another 6 months, it's going to be the difference between getting this critical data from beta testing in patient rooms at Toronto Rehab versus not.
Mm-hmm.
And that really excited me. Now, having said all this, I think it took a while for me to give myself a chance to excel in science.
Mm-hmm.
So when I stopped working on the product development stuff and focused a bit more on my thesis, I discovered that I'm actually a lot more sciencey inclined than I ever dreamt I was.
Interesting.
And if you'd asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have said, no, I'm going to industry. I'm not going to be in academia. I'll do the minimum science to graduate, but I'm in it for the products.
Right.
And and I think when I gave myself a chance to like really soak um, in the scientific work, so this looked at basically how people recover from balance loss and how the design of the built environment around them affects how well they recover. Um, I got really excited by how a lot of our understanding of human movement just totally degenerates when you're dealing with the rapid context of balance recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and looking back, I kind of wish I'd given myself a chance to just soak in that a bit sooner.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at the same time, had I not ended up in academia, the product work really would have really helped me, I think, get industry jobs. Recognizing that that's a route that a lot of students take once they graduate.
Right. So it allowed you to keep your kind of option open to industry, while kind of convincing yourself that science was, in research, a career in academia was the way you wanted to end up going.
Yeah, I think so. It gave me a chance to, I think, work
That's interesting.
meaningfully in all those areas. And at the end of it, think to myself, okay, the product work is cool. I'm more in it for the science. But if I do decide to stay in academia, I still need the industry connections to support a research program, right? So
Yep.
I think it all comes circling back to help you in the end.
Nice.
Did I
Nice.
need to spend as long as I did on it? Probably not. But, that's life, right? I can't go through life thinking back on what I could have done differently. So,
Fair enough. Fair enough. Are you still, by the way, in? Are you, all the products you worked on? I can't remember all of them, but I know the grab bar. What did we call? Sorry, I'm forgetting all the names
right.
now.
So
Been long.
there was the Move Easy pull system, which is a kit
Right.
of handrails so you can install in the home without drilling to the walls or the floor or the ceiling.
Yes.
And then there's the corresponding Stand Easy pole system, which is a pole that is cantilevered to the wall and it's designed for areas where you can't insert pressure fit poles because the ceilings are fake.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and the goal of that is to help people get out of bed more independently.
Yeah, right. Now I'm remembering. So it's been a while since I've thought about those projects. It's been. Have you been in touch with? Are they still out there? Are they still on the market? And Andy's company still has them for sale.
According to the internet, they're still on the market.
They're
So,
still there. Well,
yeah.
fantastic. Yeah, yeah. We have a couple of really. I have a couple of videos actually for our little talk that we're doing for the Canadian. What is it? Association of Occupational Therapists. We're doing this thing. I was thinking about digging up one of those videos where someone talks about how much that one of those poles helped her. Well, there's actually, I have a video from someone using kind of a stand easy type pole in her home next to the bed, and then I have a video of someone in the hospital next to, with the other product that you mentioned, the stand easy, um, next to the bed, and talking about, and he was using it to transfer out of bed into a wheelchair and talking about how amazing it was that he was able to do that independently. So it definitely has a big impact, and kind of underrated technology. So simple yet so effective and useful.
Yeah, I think so. I think, now that you mentioned that, I think one of the big things that I really took from that entire experience was that you can spend all this time in the laboratory or in the shop building stuff, testing stuff, making recommendations. And it's just amazing to see how your best efforts can totally fall apart when the communication fails.
Right.
um, if you can't convince someone to install a product in their home, you might as well not have it.
Yes.
Um,
So find
and I think a lot of your efforts in that area really kind of reinforce that key lesson to me that,
yeah,
I think applies to a lot of different sectors.
trying to figure out how we actually get people to change their behavior and consider a new product in their life when I think so much of this field people don't like feeling um, medicalized, right? So we don't want products that make our homes look medical, like an institution. Um, and probably that's why people don't like, even though a lot more people probably would benefit from things like canes and walkers and grab bars, they refuse generally to put them in. Yet, if we could just find a way, creative ways to persuade people, right? Gentle persuasive methods. I think there's a whole area of research that we could be looking at for that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, 100%.
And the products that you worked on, the interesting thing is they are kind of temporary. So you could use the argument, why don't you just try it for a little bit? And then if it works, great. If not, we'll take it away. And that argument seems to work really well in my experience. So yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So then if we move ahead from there, so you did your PhD and completed it successfully, and then you're thinking, okay, what next? And then what was the process kind of as you neared the completion of your PhD?
Right. So, I guess about, I want to say 8 months or so before I was likely to submit my thesis internally. I think it would have been about a year before I formally defended. I started to consider postdoctoral options as well as some options outside of academia. Um, so I put in some applications for teaching focused faculty positions because those are a bit easier to get coming out of PhD work, and I had some pretty good experiences in teaching when I was at U of T. Um,
Was
but
that
I
as
was
a
also sorry.
sorry as a lecture? Did you lecture or was that like as a TA? Would you say?
So I was a teach. I was hired as a teaching assistant.
Yes.
So I worked with some of the first year and fourth year undergraduate design courses at U of T.
Right. Right.
But the faculty who I work with were very proactive about giving their TAs the opportunities to grow within the role if they wanted. So I was able to give, I think, 4 or 5 lectures by the
Nice.
time I graduated, and turned out something like 4 teaching focused conference papers, which um, I think was an opportunity that I'm really glad that I got in hindsight.
Hmm.
Um, See, I'd gone for some teaching roles. I got some interviews in that. But part of me was kind of like, I'm just discovering that I'm good at this research thing. I kind of want to give it more of a chance. Um, so I was thinking about other opportunities in the area of fall and injury prevention and motor control and biomechanics. Um, and it was really important to me to get experience that would be complementary to what I got at TRI. Um, so I ended up emailing Steve Rabinovich out at Simon Fraser University. And what prompted this was that the Age Well Network of Centers of Excellence in Technology and Aging, that's a mouthful, but they released their postdoctoral and graduate scholarship competition. So I just emailed Steve and I was like, I'm really interested in the work that you're doing. Uh, the AgeWell has released its like funding competition. Would you be willing to work with me on a proposal? And if it's funded, would you be willing to hire me as a postdoc? Um, and that approach, I'll clarify that I had met Steve at conferences a few years back. So it's a relationship that I've been building for a couple of years. So when I emailed him, there wasn't any question that I like was interested in falls,
Mhm.
um, or balance or anything like that.
He recognized your name and probably had read your, your PhD papers and stuff like that.
Yeah, so in principle, he would have read my PhD papers, except because I spent so much time on product work, I hadn't actually published anything at that point.
Right. He would have
Um,
seen your conference presentations
yeah,
and
he would have
chatted
seen
with you.
conference presentations,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we would have had discussions. And it's not like I couldn't account for why I was being slow to publish, right? Like,
sure.
you know, instead of these journal articles you're looking for, here's some patents. We can pinch it with that until my PhD work comes out, right?
Right.
Um, so yeah, and I think that approach made it attractive for both of us because it meant that we could work together on a proposal.
Hmm.
And if we ended up hating the experience, then you find out before anyone's packed up and moved, before any payroll decisions have been made. It's
Yes.
well early enough that I can, other options are certainly feasible without any real harm done.
Yes.
But as it turned out, it was actually a really good experience to work together on building that proposal and ultimately getting funded the first try.
Yeah.
So it turned into like, my time turned into, oh, I can get the science out. Maybe I'll catch the Olympics in Korea in 2018. Once I graduate, I'll take a break, consider my options after. And that turned to like, oh man, so I have a job in Vancouver starting in early 2018.
Yeah.
Um,
Better wrap this PhD
better wrap this PhD
up.
up. And thankfully, my committee was very pragmatic and said, like, do the minimum to graduate and then just get the papers published as you have time to do it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Good. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so you so that was your postdoc. So you moved out to BC, and then yeah, what was next after that? So then was that 1 year or 2 years that you did the postdoc?
so I actually postdoc there for 3 years,
3 years.
though I guess a few months of that overlapped with finishing up my PhD.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I moved out in January 2018. Um, and then I again had the chance to be involved in a range of projects. So not so much like commercialization at the same level as what I was doing at TRI, and that was a personal choice. But like I was still involved in some um, early stage testing and advancing products that had come out of the laboratory.
Hmm.
And I was also involved in developing testing standards for wearable hip protectors. And this is again thinking kind of bigger picture where I was kind of like, I still like the sciencey thing, but let's not kid ourselves. Jobs are limited.
Hmm.
This would have been 2018, 2019, kind of pre-pandemic when I was working on these types of projects.
Hmm.
Um, but as this was kind of going on, a lot of my PhD work went to press, and then postdoc work started emerging, and I'm realizing that I'm actually competitive for faculty roles.
Hmm.
Um, so I was kind of like, okay, this, I guess I submitted my first research application probably a little over a year into the postdoc.
Okay.
And I was kind of like, okay, I've got some time left. It's if it doesn't work out, it won't be the end of the world. And ended up getting an interview on my very first try, which
Hmm.
I think, was kind of luck because I didn't get the job. I then submitted other applications, and I think of the next like 10 applications I submitted, only one of them resulted in an interview.
Okay.
um, and I guess while this was also going on, I was able to get a larger kind of BC's got a health research fund that's like the provincial analog of the Canadian Institutes of Health Research.
Hmm.
So I was able to land one of their 3-year postdoctoral fellowships, and it just gave me a bit of stability and security while I figured the rest of my life out and watched a lot of videos of people falling in long-term care to understand some of the factors that affected head impact and injury risk.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think as I was as I approached the end of 2019, so this is getting toward the end of my second year, though still only a year and a half post PhD. I had been applying to some faculty roles throughout Canada, as well as to a position with the National Research Council that focused on policy development for the National Building Code of Canada. So, kind of the other side of the table of the group that had used my research for my PhD. Um, So I got interviews with them and with UBC Okanagan, and all of this played out in, I think, early March 2020. So
Mhm.
I did my like campus visit to my current role on March 10th, 2020. Um, Everything collapsed, what, March 13th, I think.
Yeah.
Um, so I ended up getting like four rejection letters from other positions I'd applied to, being like, "Oh, this search has been canceled," and I was like, "Okay, I guess I'm never getting a job then." And I guess mercifully, like both the Research Council and UBCO continue to plan to staff their positions. So
Mhm.
um, the paperwork ended up being signed, I think, mid July 2020. So that's about 2 years post PhD. And then I made the official move to kind of end my postdoc and start in this role January 2021.
Nice. Yeah. Do you think, I think I definitely felt this, what's it called? Imposter syndrome, like coming out of a PhD, a year into your postdoc, you started applying for positions. Like that's a brave, it feels like if in that state, I would feel, I mean, when I was applying for the first academic positions I was looking for, I remember feeling, oh my God, there's no way I can, this is so ridiculous that I'm even applying for something like this. Would you recommend it to students to do that despite how you might feel about that, or did you feel that sense at all?
100%.
Okay.
um, so yeah, I would definitely say do it. And like I am the slowest application writer ever. Like it is painful to watch me write these things because I get like mentally caught up in like convincing myself that I like, my work will never cut it, so why bother trying? Um, so I actually submitted my very first faculty application 2 years before I finished my PhD. This was for a teaching role. And what that process did is that it allowed me to identify where the gaps were in my teaching portfolio. And
Mm,
it gave me a year to work with the professors who I knew at U of T to work on filling those gaps so that I would be competitive for future positions, while my teaching role was still under their domain so that they could, we knew that we could work on areas that I could build up my portfolio where I knew I'd succeed.
mhm.
Um, and then when it came to the faculty applications, I think the same logic applies. One of the things that I found is that a lot of the positions that I never dreamt I'd get interviews for, I ended up getting shortlisted. And then positions that I thought I'd be a shoo-in for, I didn't get like even a first interview. So like my second faculty application was for a Canada Research Chair at University of Victoria in assistive technology.
Right.
And I was like, this is a Hail Mary. Like, I'm not going to get an interview. Like, I'm not. But because they wanted to see someone with expertise in all three of research, development, and commercialization, I was
Mhm.
looking at the posting. And I'm just like, wow, this is going to be a very, very thin group of people
Right.
um, who are going to fit all three of those areas, and can still teach competently.
Yes.
Um, and then I ended up getting shortlisted for that. And like I got a campus visit. I didn't get the job, but I got a great network out of it. Like I'm still in touch with some of the faculty who had considered me and ultimately didn't hire me. But, like it's not like we left on bad terms or anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then I think even my current role, the position was for like machine learning and digital health. And I don't do that.
Mm,
But it was posted through mechanical engineering. So again, I figured that like you're not going to get a lot of applicants who do meaningful work in health with mechanical backgrounds, but who also do machine learning.
right.
Um, so I was kind of like, okay, I'll flip the application that I sent to you, Vic. Very quick, like 10 minutes to change Victoria with Okanagan, switch out that paragraph of like who I can work with on campus.
Yes.
Um, and then I was shocked to get a first interview and even more shocked to get a second interview. And then by the time I came to meet everyone, I wasn't surprised when I got the job, except it was COVID. So I was surprised that they didn't cancel the position. So
Right. Well,
yeah,
that's
like
good.
you truly, truly never know with these things. So I would definitely encourage, even if you're not feeling sure, give it a shot.
Mhm.
Um, because your first application probably won't succeed. If it does, then awesome. But if it doesn't, then you have the materials ready to go and you've identified the gaps in your background to work on, to make that next one that much stronger, by the time you actually want the job and care to get hired.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good advice. The When you go to these interviews, what is that? I wonder if, if for students who have maybe never gone into a job interview like that, what do you want to just describe what do you have advice for students going into that environment?
Um, yeah, I think so. So the first is that if you are getting an interview, you are under serious consideration for the job. So any feelings that you are having of imposter syndrome need to be left behind, because a faculty, think of this from a search committee's perspective. Every single applicant or interview is a day of work for a search committee member.
Mhm.
Multiply that by 5 people for the entire search committee.
Yeah.
Um, there is no such thing as a pity interview in this area.
Right.
So know that you belong the instant you set foot on, in the car to get over, or on campus to enter that room. Um, I think the second thing is that get lots of input and practice. Um, so one of the things that I did to prepare that was really helpful was first of all, I did my job talk and I prepared the slides about 2 weeks in advance. And I did dry runs with people who'd been on search committees so that they could evaluate the coherence of the talk and ensure that I was coming across as someone who was seriously angling to become a colleague of the people on the search committee, right? So it's not like a graduate student talk where you might bring up one study, um, talk about the detailed filter parameters that you're dealing with, and technical details that a search committee is not going to care about, but instead shifting the framing of the talk to this is who I am, this is what I've done, this is where I'm going, and this is why you need to hire me because the field will collapse if you don't. um, and then the last thing that I did that was really valuable was I looked up sample search committee questions. So you can actually, if you go to the internet, you can get good guidance on what common questions are because they tend not to change very much from committee to committee.
Mhm.
Um, and then I got feedback on how I'd respond to these and ensure that my responses to common questions weren't portraying me as someone who came off as totally pathological, or who wasn't serious about the future.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
wow, you clearly did a lot of homework there. But that's yeah, the so would you say that the job talk for someone who hasn't put together a job talk, is it like, I sort of imagine the your PhD proposal, is it the equivalent of that but for your career as, starting off for the first few years, um, but also taking into account, how do you connect those projects to the whatever the 5 people or the institution that you're joining, then how, and is it a proposal for your how many years would you say you were kind of proposing in that
right.
job?
So in terms of the section that described the future, the way I approached that was I took about a 5 year framework.
Yeah.
Um, so I articulated what my big picture 20-year kind of vision for the future was, and that was a very kind of broad um, we are going to see reductions in the rate of falls and the rate of fall related injuries as a result of my innovations in task and environmental design for injury prevention.
Right.
Um, and then I focused on a 5 year plan, and that is useful in the Canadian context because that aligns with the NSERC Discovery Grant that people will expect you to apply for if you stay in Canada and do something in the engineering or biomechanics field. And then I identified kind of a separate line of inquiry that dealt with my clinical type work, that could be funded through a combination of health research funds, and I'd identified industry partners um, who would be able to support things like my tax proposals.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that was important because it came off as a lot more credible than being like, oh, I'm going to get CIHR right out of the gate with no pilot data and in a competition with a 10% success rate.
Right.
Um, so it was important to kind of show the path that I planned out to kind of get to a larger team at the end of it.
Yeah.
Um, with regard to connecting to other people in the area, I went through industry partners in British Columbia and in Canada who'd be a good fit for the work. And I went through the faculty lists of who was situated at UBC Okanagan, not just in engineering, but across the entire um, institution.
Yeah.
and I'd also identified community groups who I could work with. So I have some good connections with the older adult and caregiver groups who are affiliated with AgeWell.
Hmm.
Um, so a lot of my projects actually emerged from discussions with them. So I ensured they were attributed and highlighted their commitment to work with me in the future.
Yep.
Um, and then I think the last thing that I did that was important was I went online and went through the Google Scholar profiles of the people on the search committee and
Hmm.
people who I was listing as collaborators. And the reason for that is because their web pages tend to be like 10 years out of date. So you learn that actually, in some cases, entire research foci have shifted. And there were two members of the search committee who I wouldn't have thought would be relevant. And I read their publications in the last 2 years, and I'm like, oh, yeah, you should probably be noted as a collaborator on this project, even if you don't want to. The fit is actually there.
Yeah.
So
So the other day I was just talking to somebody about this, how someone needs to write the script that takes your Google Scholar and puts it on your website. Like I
yeah,
cannot find that because it's so hard to keep it up to date. Like even with the modest number of publications I have, it's hard. Like once you get more than one or two, like in your postdoc years, maybe you have one or two or three publications a year coming out. But then once you start getting into the five or six, it's like, wow, I have to it's a concerted effort to keep things up to date. And yet that's so important to make sure people know what you're working on now and how things shift over time. But
yeah.
yeah, do you know of anything like that that can scrape the scholar?
Publications, I don't.
Yeah.
Um, Except for copying and pasting CV lines whenever the updates are done. I
Yeah.
have a link to my Google Scholar profile on my webpage directly, so
Yeah.
that helps with up to dateness. The other thing I discovered though is that you can couple a Twitter feed with your webpage. So as long as I wouldn't do this for a personal account. I do it for like a lab focused account, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that can essentially double as your news feed.
That's
And the
interesting.
same thing goes with a Facebook profile. So
Yes. Yeah. Those are great tips. Yeah. Good. The one other thing I wanted to ask you about is going backpedaling a bit because I missed it. But you worked in terms of the teaching you did, your deep summer academy experience. You did that for two summers, correct? You were the first
correct.
person at our lab to do that, and then Ahmed mentioned, Ahmed talked about it in his chat, and so I wonder if you had anything, you know, building on what Ahmed said, is there anything different you felt about it, or would you recommend it to other students, grad students?
Yeah. So just a very quick clarification. So I don't know if you remember Varun Ori,
Right. Yes, I
but
do.
he actually kickstarted the entire thing. So
Right.
yeah, I did the first course, and then I kind of inherited part of what he developed. I made some changes to kind of fit my own strengths. And then, yeah, I did it for 2 years before handing things off to Ahmed.
Right.
So yeah, I think thinking more kind of broadly, grad school is a great opportunity to pursue stuff that is of interest to you and to build. Like it is hard to find other areas where you will have the freedom to be like, okay, I'm going to take off for a week and like run this course because I want to.
Hmm.
Um, and same with any other sort of opportunity that can contribute to your training or that you're interested in. So I would definitely recommend, if something comes up that you think is important for your personal development, maybe it helps pay the bills. In my case, it definitely funded a vacation, so that was cool. You know, go for it. Have no guilt about it, especially when it comes to whether that opportunity is going to pay you. Um, so yeah, I did the Deep Summer Academy thing, and for those who aren't familiar with it, it's a week-long course for high school students. So we ran a course in rehabilitation engineering, and we use a combination of like lectures and laboratory activities and design projects to give students exposure to areas of rehab engineering. So this includes like brain machine interfacing, pediatric rehabilitation. We had a section on home care, had a section on built environment design and safe mobility. So the whole kind of gamut of things. So I think that for me, it was a really good experience to build confidence in giving presentations. So like I actually don't know if you remember this, but there is footage of me in the first few years of research day at Toronto Rehab where I would take total panic attacks on the stage. like
I,
completely freezing in front of
y-
the entire audience.
you're not the only one. I have. There was one where, yeah, I totally blanked. I could not remember anything and kind of a deer in the headlights look. I think we all have
Yeah.
experiences like that. Totally. Yeah.
When you see the audience and like start shaking, and so teaching for me was a really important way to kind of overcome that fear of speaking in public.
Yes.
And it gave me a chance to really turn presenting into a strength. I would consider presentations a strength now, and it certainly wasn't like that when I when I started my grad work.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think the apart from that, the deep opportunity gave me a chance to work with students who were from all around the world, and that was really exciting. Some of them got to learn about areas of the field that they didn't even know existed, so that was really cool. And I think if we're talking like ulterior motives here, I was able to get a lot of support from other people from Toronto Rehab and from like Bloor Review and the general community. So I think Tilak, you helped out one year with a talk on lifting
Yes.
and a demo.
Yeah.
We were able to bring in a field educator from a local home care agency to run the home care activity. So she talked about some of the most challenging experiences that her clients had in care at home. And then
Mhm.
the students developed something to improve the quality of life or to solve one of the challenges that she discussed earlier that day.
Yeah.
So that was incredibly compelling. And I'd say, for me as an instructor, just as much as the students.
Mhm.
Tim Giblin, so Tillich, you'll know him. For those who don't, he is the tour guide of Toronto Rehab.
Yes.
So he was an inpatient for or for acquired brain injury, and I guess his rehabilitation was incredibly successful. So he went from being comatose to him.
Mhm.
um, so he also gave a tour and just a spiel to the students on his experience, and that was also very compelling and never gets old to hear about. So
Seeing the research described by him, yeah, with his perspective is incredibly interesting. Yeah, for the
yeah,
way.
to see a someone who's been a patient come in and be like, no, this is actually the most important thing in the world, and you've been staring at mat lab for the past 6 months, you might not see it that way, but we see it that way. So
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I don't. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. I think that you've given a lot of really practical advice, perspective on how students can think about approaching grad school, the kind of the job search after grad school. Um, is there anything else any other things you want to mention? Anything else?
yeah, I think just for the students who might be watching this and making decisions on what to do next, I think the first thing that I would say is that the right fit will come, and it's worth taking the time to find the right fit for you as far as grad work goes. So yeah, if you're, say like me and you were like a high 70 student, there will be labs where they're like, oh, your grades are too low, we don't want you. That cuts both ways, right? Do you really want to work in a culture that's not going to value what you have to offer? Because for every school or investigator who's like that, there's going to be others who are like, oh, wow, you did a whole bunch of other things during undergrad and you still pulled off a 77 average. You're totally a great fit on our team.
Yeah.
So, take the time to find the right fit for you. And, kind of on that same token, it is easy to start grad school. It's not always easy to leave it, right? So if you're really not sure about whether you want to go with a certain program or opportunity, my advice is always to work, um, because the opportunities will come, and the day will come where you'll find one you are sure about doing,
Yeah.
um, and it'll just make the entire experience so much more pleasant and enjoyable for everyone involved. If both you and your supervisor are committed to your success in the line of work.
Yeah.
Um, And
Excellent.
I think the last thing that I would say is that the sky truly is the limit. So, you're going to get a whole bunch of well intentioned advice coming up. Take all of it with a grain of salt, including everything I've just told you, um, because ultimately you're the one who knows yourself the best, who knows your goals the best, and who's really in charge of your own destiny, right? So take ownership of that and enjoy the ride.
Great advice. Excellent. Well, that's a great way to leave it there. Thank you very much, Vicky, for joining us. And maybe the one last thing we should do is maybe if there's a student out there that's interested in what you're doing now, are you looking for students in a particular with particular interests that should get in touch with you?
Yeah, that would be pretty awesome. So yes, recruitment for me is an ongoing process. It is application season, and so if anyone is interested, we can work to help get external funding to help you come out here. My work looks at preventing falls and fall related injuries by getting a better sense of, in particular, how people's tasks like carrying groceries or like walking home from the store in the winter affect fall and injury risk. And I also do a lot on environmental design. So looking at how things like handrail design or aspects of the workplace affect whether someone gets hurt or not. Um, so proposals and projects are still kind of in the works. But yeah, if it's something that's of interest to you, there's no harm in opening the discussion. And I will be recruiting a lot in the next 2 years. And the reason why you want to work with me, first of all, is because I network with the awesome people like Tilak. Um, no, I do have a really great network, and honestly, my friends are bigger than I am. So after this call, I'm going to be jumping onto a call with some people, some friends from the technology and aging, older adult, and caregiver community. So Tilak, you'll know Ron Valeno and
Sure.
possibly Roger Marple.
Yes.
So we work together and we're friends, right? And they're in this to mentor students because they're awesome.
Yeah.
So
You're the best at this, at networking. Absolutely. I remember that about you while you were here. You're always connected to all the right people, and you're also great at connecting people when they need something. That you're one of those people that reaches out and says, "Hey, did you know about this person? You should talk to this person?" And it's such a valuable person to have around to point out what else is going on. Yeah.
appreciate it. Well, when you're leaving undergrad with a 77 average, backs to the wall, you need to get good at finding that person who's going to take you. So
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you so much, Vicki, for joining us. And yeah, best of luck with everything. And I hope some great students get in touch with you soon.
yeah, same to you, Tilak. This was a pleasure.